When 3 divorced women at the neighborhood barbecue said, "We need a man who can handle us," I laughed it off as a joke, but by the end of that night, I realized they weren't joking at all. I hadn't planned on doing anything special that weekend. Most of my Saturdays looked the same: a quick run, a grocery trip, maybe catching up on some work. But then a neighbor knocked on my door and said, "Hey, you should stop by later. We're having a barbecue in the cul-de-sac. Good food, good people." I almost said no. I didn't know many of the neighbors beyond polite waves and the occasional small talk when we collected the mail. But something in me, maybe the quiet boredom of being 25 and still figuring out who I was, said yes. By early evening, I found myself walking down the street toward the sound of music and laughter. The smell hit me first: grilled chicken, smoky and charred just right, mixed with the sweetness of corn on the cob roasting on the fire. Kids darted in and out of the sprinklers, their squeals carrying through the warm summer air. String lights were already glowing faintly, crisscrossing between 2 porches, and the low thrum of classic rock played from someone's speaker. I told myself to relax, to just enjoy a burger and maybe meet a few people. But then I noticed them. 3 women standing together near the grill, their laughter weaving through the noise in a way that drew attention without asking for it. They looked to be in their early 40s, each different, but each carrying the same air of quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. One wore a light sundress, her hair pinned up in a loose twist that let a few strands fall across her cheek. She laughed easily, the kind of laugh that made other people smile without knowing why. Another wore jeans and a soft linen blouse, a glass of wine in hand, eyes sharp and observant even as she smiled. The third leaned against the picnic table, her posture relaxed, her gaze steady, as if she'd long ago learned how to take up space without apology. I don't know what made me glance at them longer than I should have, but when I did, I realized all 3 were glancing back. Not in the fleeting, dismissive way strangers look at each other at parties, but with a weight that lingered. One of them caught me watching and gave me a smile, not playful, not dismissive. Just a small curve of her lips that carried more awareness than I was ready for. My throat tightened. I quickly turned away, pretending to busy myself at the drink table. The cold glass of soda in my hand grounded me, but my attention kept slipping back. Their voices carried, lower, steadier than the girls I knew at school or work. And even from across the yard, I could feel the kind of energy they brought with them. It wasn't intimidating exactly. More like magnetic. And even though I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a small part of me already knew this night wasn't going to be ordinary. By the time I'd settled in with a plate of food, the backyard felt alive with chatter and laughter. Neighbors clustered in small groups, kids chased each other around the lawn, and the summer sky had begun to tint with the soft blush of evening. I found a spot near the grill, close enough to catch some of the warmth but far enough to not be in the way. That's when they moved closer. The 3 women I'd noticed earlier were suddenly in my orbit, plates in hand, their conversation weaving in and out of mine. It felt accidental at first, like we just happened to end up in the same spot. But then one of them looked straight at me and said, "You live a few houses down, don't you? I've seen you jogging in the mornings." I nodded, a little surprised. "Yeah. That's me. I try to run before the sun gets too brutal." She smiled knowingly, like she'd been watching longer than I realized. From there, the others joined in, asking about work, about whether I'd grown up here. Their questions weren't shallow, not the kind people ask just to fill silence. They listened closely, exchanged glances with each other, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being studied, in a way that wasn't unfriendly but was definitely intentional. The conversation turned playful after a while. One of them raised her glass, gave me an amused look, and said, "You know, we've all decided what we really need is a man who can handle us." The other 2 broke into laughter, not mocking or cruel, but the kind of laugh that comes from being in on the same secret. I chuckled nervously, trying to play along. "Is that so?" I asked, smiling back. And here I thought I was just coming for the free food. More laughter. One of them reached across to grab a napkin from the table, her hand brushing lightly against my forearm in the process. It was quick, barely a second, but my skin registered the warmth of her touch like it had been burned into me. They kept smiling at me in that way, light-hearted, but with something else behind it. Their eyes didn't dart away when mine met theirs. Instead, they lingered, holding my gaze just a little too long for it to feel like small talk. The smoke from the grill drifted past us, carrying the scent of sizzling meat. The sun had dipped lower now, painting everything in amber light. Someone clinked a beer bottle against another in the distance, but all I could hear was the sound of their laughter, deep and unhurried. I told myself it was a joke. That's all it was. Just three women having fun at a summer party. Still, the way they looked at me, steady, amused, curious, left me unsettled in a way I couldn't explain. And as I stood there, pretending to sip slowly from my cup, one thought kept circling in my mind: what if they weren't joking at all? As the evening wore on, the energy of the barbecue shifted. The kids had mostly disappeared indoors, the music played a little softer, and the crowd thinned into smaller clusters. The air had cooled just enough that people pulled light sweaters over their shoulders, and the string lights above glowed brighter against the deepening sky. I found myself drifting between conversations, but somehow, no matter where I turned, one of the three women always seemed to be there. The first moment came with Anna, the one in the sundress. She had a way of smiling that made you feel like she was letting you in on a secret. We ended up leaning against the fence, talking about music. She teased me for not knowing the bands she grew up with. "You've never heard this song?" She laughed, tilting her head back as the speaker cycled through another classic rock track. "My God, you're practically a child." I laughed too, though my chest tightened at the way she said it, not cruelly, but with a kind of warmth, like she didn't actually mind the gap between us. Our arms brushed as we leaned against the wooden rail, and though it could have been accidental, she didn't pull hers away. Later, I wandered toward the cooler for another drink, and that's where I found Claire, the one with sharp eyes and a linen blouse. She handed me a can before I could even reach for one. "You look like you needed this," she said, her tone lighter than her gaze. And then, almost without warning, she asked about my family, about whether I was close with them. The question caught me off guard. I told her the truth, about how complicated it was, how I hadn't quite figured out where I belonged between obligation and independence. She nodded slowly, not filling the silence with easy words. Instead, she let it stretch, and in that pause, I felt seen in a way I wasn't used to. Her hand brushed mine as she passed the can, and the coolness of the aluminum only highlighted the warmth of her touch. The third moment came later, in the kitchen. Most of the party was still outside, but I'd slipped in to refill my cup. I wasn't alone for long. Rachel, the one who had leaned casually against the picnic table earlier, followed me in, carrying an empty wineglass. "You hiding from us?" she asked, a sly smile playing at her lips. "Just needed more lemonade," I said, lifting my cup with a half-smile. We stood close at the counter, slicing lemons together to drop into the drinks. At one point our shoulders brushed, lightly, but enough that I felt the warmth of her against me. Neither of us moved away. The only sounds were the soft scrape of the knife, the clink of ice in the pitcher, and the low hum of voices outside. When I glanced at her, she was already looking at me. Her eyes held mine a second too long, steady and unhurried. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how close we were, how small the kitchen felt, how the simple act of cutting lemons could feel charged with something unsaid. By the time we stepped back outside, I realized something had shifted. These weren't passing encounters anymore. Each moment carried weight, like pieces of a puzzle slowly clicking into place. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to run from it, or lean in closer. The night had deepened, the air cooler now, carrying the faint scent of cut grass mixed with the smoky trail of the grill. Most of the neighbors had begun saying their goodbyes, waving as they drifted down the street. But the four of us remained, me, and the three women who had somehow turned a casual neighborhood barbecue into something far more complicated. I sat at the long picnic table with them, the wood rough beneath my palms. String lights buzzed faintly above, moths circling lazily around the glow. The women sat across from me, angled just slightly toward each other, and I couldn't shake the feeling they were speaking in a language without words. Their glances, subtle, but full of meaning, passed back and forth like cards in a private game. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then, when Anna's knee brushed against mine under the table, she didn't shift away. And when Claire leaned forward to pour more wine into Rachel's glass, her gaze flickered to me with a slowness that felt deliberate. I laughed at something they said, I don't even remember what, just to fill the air. But inside, my mind was racing. What am I doing here? The age difference hung heavy in my thoughts. They were in their early 40s, confident, self-possessed, carrying the kind of beauty that didn't fade under harsh lights or long days. And me? I was 25, still trying to figure out who I was, what I wanted. Was I fooling myself into thinking I could belong in their world? And yet, the pull was undeniable. I caught Rachel watching me, her head tilted slightly, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips as if she could see right through me. When our eyes locked, I felt my chest tighten. I looked away, staring down at my half-empty cup, pretending to be fascinated by the way condensation dripped down its sides. But the air between us grew heavier with every unspoken pause. At one point, Claire leaned in closer to hear me over the soft hum of the music. Her hair brushed my shoulder, and the scent of lavender drifted toward me, subtle, calming, but charged now with new meaning. I froze, every nerve in my body alive to the nearness of her. When she pulled back, her eyes lingered just a second longer than they needed to, and I knew she'd felt it too. The three of them didn't act as if I were out of place. If anything, they looked at me as though I were exactly where I was supposed to be. That was what unsettled me most. I sat there, my heart thudding hard in my chest, torn between the part of me that wanted to stand up and leave before I got in too deep, and the part of me that wanted to stay, lean into their warmth, and see where those lingering stares might lead. By the time most of the crowd had gone home, the yard had grown still. The laughter and chatter that had filled the evening faded into memory, leaving only the faint hum of crickets and the low crackle of the firepit. The glow of the flames painted everything in gold and shadow, flickering across faces that had grown softer, quieter. It was just the four of us now. I sat back in one of the lawn chairs, holding a cup I'd stopped drinking from long ago. The three of them had drawn close around the fire, not just physically, but in the way their voices lowered, their stories weaving into something deeper than casual conversation. Rachel spoke first, her voice calm but threaded with something raw. You know, I didn't think I'd ever go to another neighborhood barbecue after my divorce. I hated the small talk. I hated the way people looked at me, like I was a reminder of what they were afraid of becoming. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one filled the silence. The fire popped, sending a small shower of sparks upward. I could see her profile in the light, strong, but her eyes glassy, reflecting something more fragile. Anna reached over, her hand resting lightly on Rachel's arm. I know that feeling, she murmured. After mine, I felt invisible. Like all the effort I'd poured into holding everything together didn't count anymore. People see you as failed. Her voice caught slightly, but she smiled through it, the kind of smile that comes from surviving pain, not ignoring it. Claire nodded slowly, staring into the fire. It's strange. You spend years building a life with someone, thinking you know the rules, thinking the effort guarantees something. And then one day, you're sitting across from a stranger at the breakfast table. You wonder how long you've been pretending. I felt their words sink into me, heavier than I expected. I'd never been married, never been divorced, but something about the honesty in their voices pulled me in. It wasn't just sadness, it was courage, the kind that comes from naming things most people run from. Without thinking too hard about it, I said quietly, it doesn't sound like failure to me. It sounds like you fought for something that mattered. And even if it didn't last, that doesn't erase what it meant. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me, the firelight reflecting in each of them. For a second, I felt exposed, like I'd said too much. But then Rachel gave a small, almost relieved smile. That's kinder than most people have been, she said softly. The air shifted after that. Not dramatically, but enough that I felt it. Their postures softened, their shoulders angled a little closer toward me. Anna's hand lingered on mine for a moment, her thumb brushing lightly across my knuckles before she pulled away. Claire's knee found mine under the table and stayed there, steady and quiet. The night was cooler now, the fire warming only the parts of us close enough to feel it. And in that circle of heat and shadow, I realized something had changed. This wasn't just three women talking about their pasts. It was the beginning of them letting me into it. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, sending up only the occasional spark. The night felt hushed now, wrapped in a kind of intimacy that had nothing to do with the number of people left, and everything to do with the silence between us. I checked my watch without meaning to. Past midnight. My body told me I should go. Tomorrow was Sunday, and I'd already stayed longer than I'd planned. I set my empty cup on the table and shifted forward in my chair. Well, I said, clearing my throat, I should probably get out of your hair. The words felt clumsy, almost wrong as soon as I spoke them. Rachel tilted her head, studying me with that steady gaze of hers. You don't have to rush off, she said, her tone even, almost casual, but carrying more weight than the words alone. Anna leaned in slightly, her sundress catching the glow of the firelight. Yeah. Stay a little longer. It's not like anyone's in a hurry. Claire didn't say anything right away, but her hand reached out, almost absently, brushing the edge of my sleeve between her fingers. Just that small touch sent a current through me. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before. We like having you here. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow, just the three of them, the embers, and me. My heart beat hard in my chest, the weight of their invitation pressing against my hesitation. Part of me wanted to stand, to laugh it off, to walk back to my apartment, and let the night dissolve into memory. That would have been safer, simpler. But another part, stronger now, undeniable, wanted to sink into this moment, to see what it meant that they wanted me here, with them. I leaned back instead of standing, letting out a slow breath. All right, I said quietly. I'll stay. The shift was immediate, subtle but powerful. Their shoulders relaxed, their smiles widened, not triumphant, but warm, like they'd been hoping I'd say that. We moved from the fire pit to the living room, the house dim and cozy, lit only by the soft lamp in the corner. The sofa was deep, and somehow we all fit, settling closer than seemed necessary. The cushions dipped beneath our weight, pulling us together in ways I didn't resist. Rachel sat at my left, her arm brushing against mine with every small movement. Anna curled up at the far end, her bare foot resting lightly near my leg. Claire sat beside me on the right, her hand still finding my sleeve, as if she didn't want to let go completely. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of breaths of nearness, of the unspoken recognition that something had changed. I didn't know what this was or where it might lead. But sitting there, surrounded by their warmth, I knew one thing for certain. I didn't want to leave. Not tonight. The house was quiet now, the music from earlier long gone, replaced by the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The only light came from a lamp in the corner, casting a warm glow across the living room. Shadows pulled in the edges, but on the sofa where we sat, everything felt close, cocooned, almost suspended outside of time. I could feel the weight of the day in my body, the long hours, the food, the slow drift of wine, but my mind was anything but tired. If anything, I was more awake than ever, every nerve aware of where I was, who I was with. Rachel was beside me, leaning just close enough that her arm brushed mine every time she shifted. Her movements were unhurried, calm, like she was comfortable in letting silence do the work. On my other side, Claire's hand still rested against my sleeve, her fingers absently toying with the fabric, grounding me with that small, steady connection. Anna, curled up at the far end, tucked her legs beneath her, her sundress folding in soft creases. She rested her chin on her hand, watching us with a quiet smile, her eyes soft, unreadable but warm. No one was in a rush to speak. And yet, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of breaths, of the faint sound of someone's heartbeat when the room was still, of something unsaid that all of us seemed to be circling around. At one point, Rachel exhaled a laugh, quiet and low. "You know," she said, "I wasn't joking earlier. About needing a man who could handle us." The words landed with a different weight now. Not playful, not sharp, but honest. I swallowed, glancing at her, then at Anna, then at Claire. Their eyes were steady, unflinching, but not demanding. They weren't testing me. They were letting me decide. I let out a slow breath and leaned back against the sofa. "I didn't think you were joking," I admitted. That made Anna smile wider. She shifted closer, her bare foot brushing gently against my leg, almost without thinking. Claire gave a soft hum of approval, her hand slipping down from my sleeve to rest lightly on my arm. Rachel, without hesitation, let her head fall against my shoulder, her cheek warm against me. For a moment I froze, not from fear, but from the weight of it, the realization of where I was, what was happening. 3 women, each carrying her own history, her own scars, choosing to let me into this fragile circle they built together. My chest loosened, and I let myself breathe. Slowly I shifted, so my arm could rest comfortably around Rachel, so Claire's hand could find mine without awkward angles, so Anna could lean in just a little closer. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the sofa, the rhythm of their breaths, it all seemed to blend together. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know what anyone would say if they saw us like this. But in that moment, surrounded by warmth and steady presence, I didn't need to know. Because it wasn't an ending. It was the start of something tender, uncharted, and entirely ours.